Dr. Laura Stanton was a woman of resilient spirit and disciplined demeanor. At the age of 62, her silver hair was a testament to years of hard work and sheer determination that shaped her into the prominent physician she was now. But she hadn't always worn the cloak of comfort. As a child, her home was a one-bedroom shack nestled in the city's impoverished district, where she had fought the monsters of scarcity and hopelessness. But those monsters had taught her a valuable lesson: the power of perseverance. Now, she lived in an elegant manor house with her only daughter, Ava Stanton, in the city's upscale neighborhood. Ava, a youthful beauty of 23, lived an entirely different reality from Laura's past. She had grown up in the shade of affluence, where money was abundant and hard labor a foreign concept. One sunny afternoon, the mother-daughter duo found themselves strolling down the aisles of Fresco Mart, the city's largest supermarket. Laura, in her casual blue jeans and white button-down shirt, walked with an air of simplicity, while Ava, draped in a trendy designer ensemble, glided with the confidence that her privileged upbringing afforded. "Mom, could you get another pack of those imported chocolates?" Ava called out, her eyes sparkling at the extravagant sweets aisle. Her voice echoed against the high ceilings, attracting the attention of a few customers. Laura nodded, chuckling lightly at Ava's unabated fondness for expensive chocolates. She remembered how she had to save for weeks to afford a bar of average quality chocolate in her youth. The contrast couldn't be starker. Yet, she loved her daughter and wanted to provide her with a life she herself never had. As they continued their shopping, the difference in their attitudes grew apparent. While Laura smiled politely at the workers, Ava seemed oblivious to their presence. It was a trivial detail, but it pricked at Laura's heart. She noticed, with a hint of sadness, how Ava shrugged off the packer at the checkout aisle, a young woman around Ava's age. Meanwhile, Ava was busy scrolling through her phone, a disinterested expression on her face. She seemed miles away from the supermarket, away from the real world and its gritty realities. But the world had a way of imposing itself, as Laura knew too well. The sound of a spat diverted their attention. To Laura's utter dismay, Ava was at the center of it, rudely arguing with the packer who had apparently misbagged her expensive makeup kit. The young packer seemed taken aback, her face turning a shade of deep red. Customers began to murmur, and a heavy cloud of embarrassment enveloped Laura. She looked at her daughter, the young woman she had raised and loved, acting so unkindly. "Ava," she murmured, gently tugging her daughter's arm. But Ava shrugged her off, continuing her rude onslaught. Laura felt her heart sinking, her gaze meeting the humiliated eyes of the packer. A pang of empathy shot through her. Laura had fought hard to leave her past behind, but in that moment, it seemed like a fragment of her past had resurfaced. She was brought back to the shack, the poverty, the grueling work. It felt personal, and Laura knew she had to make things right. She looked at her daughter, then back at the packer. A plan started to form in her mind, a plan that might just bring about a much-needed change. Her heart pounded in her chest as she gathered her resolve. It was time for Ava to learn a lesson, one she wouldn't forget for a lifetime. In the confines of her sleek SUV, Dr. Laura Stanton watched as Ava fumed in the passenger seat. The icy silence was deafening, shrouding the vehicle in a tense atmosphere. Outside, the world rushed by in a blur of colors, but inside, time seemed to crawl at a snail's pace. Laura's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, a cocktail of regret, disappointment, and resolute determination. She could still feel the packer's humiliated gaze boring into her, and it was a sensation she couldn't shake off. "Mom, you embarrassed me," Ava finally blurted out, her voice simmering with indignation. She was still visibly upset about being admonished by Laura in front of the packer. "Ava," Laura started, her voice calm, yet firm. "It wasn't my intention to embarrass you, but your behavior towards that young woman was uncalled for." "But Mom, she messed up my stuff," Ava retorted, her frown deepening. Laura sighed, recalling her own past. She remembered the nights of labor, the derogatory remarks, the exhaustion. But above all, she remembered the resilience and the thirst for a better life. Ava, she realized, was yet to understand the reality beyond her opulent bubble. "Ava, listen," she began, her gaze steady on the road. "Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. That young woman might have her own struggles we cannot fathom. A bit of empathy goes a long way." Ava seemed to ponder her mother's words, but her face still held traces of the day's resentment. Laura could only hope that her words had some effect on her daughter. It was then an idea started to take shape in Laura's mind, a potentially transformative experience for Ava. Her heart pounded in her chest as she formulated the plan. She was fully aware of the drastic nature of her proposition and the resistance it would inevitably face. However, she was also confident that if Ava could endure the upcoming challenge, she could learn the precious lesson of humility. As they pulled into their sprawling driveway, Laura finally broke the silence. "Ava," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "I have a proposal for you." Ava shot her a suspicious look but didn't say anything, prompting Laura to continue. "I think it would be beneficial for you to walk in someone else's shoes, to understand what it's like to work a day in a job like that Packer's." Ava's eyes widened, and she burst into a fit of laughter. "You've got to be kidding, Mom," she managed to say between her fits of laughter. But Laura's face was stern, her eyes holding a seriousness Ava had rarely seen. "I'm serious, Ava. I think it'll be a good lesson for you." Ava's laughter slowly died down, replaced by a look of disbelief. She stared at her mother, her eyes filled with rebellion. But Laura held her gaze, unfazed. It was the beginning of a testing period, not just for Ava but for Laura too. She knew it was going to be a tough road ahead, but it was a journey she was willing to embark upon. For the sake of her daughter, for the sake of the future Ava was yet to understand. For Ava, the days that followed her mother's proposition were filled with a bizarre mix of disbelief, irritation, and resentment. She had hoped, naively so, that Laura would forget her strange idea as quickly as she had conceived it. But to her dismay, her mother was serious. The more Ava protested, the more resolute Laura seemed. "You've lived a sheltered life, Ava," Laura would say, her eyes soft but unyielding. "It's time you understand the value of hard work, the reality of life outside our bubble." Ava spent the next few nights wrestling with the uncomfortable notion. She was not ready to step out of her comfort zone, let alone work a menial job. The thought of it was humiliating, embarrassing. She was a Stanton, and Stantons didn't do menial work. But as the hours turned into days, Ava began to see a change in Laura. Her mother, always the pillar of strength, had a newfound determination in her eyes. It was the same look Laura wore when she shared stories of her struggles, her rise from nothing to the esteemed physician she was today. In the quiet hours of one restless night, Ava found herself at the crossroads of acceptance and rebellion. It was a quiet moment of self-confrontation. Her pride wanted her to reject the proposal, to fight against it. But something within her, a tiny, almost insignificant part, urged her to consider her mother's words. Morning came, and Ava found herself standing at the edge of her mother's world. Laura was waiting for her in the living room, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands and a hopeful expression on her face. Ava took a deep breath, bracing herself for the words that would irrevocably change her life. "All right, Mom," Ava started, her voice barely audible. "I'll do it." The look of surprise, followed by relief and pride that washed over Laura's face, would be etched in Ava's mind for years to come. As Ava saw the satisfaction in her mother's eyes, she felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into her heart, the first sparks of empathy. And so began Ava's journey of transformation, from an entitled heiress to a woman aware of her privilege and the importance of empathy. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was for sure: Ava Stanton was ready to cross the threshold, ready to embrace the lesson her mother had been yearning to teach her. When Ava Stanton woke up the morning following her mother's unwelcome proposition, her world remained unchanged. Her room was still a haven of luxury and privilege, a tastefully decorated space filled with designer clothes, expensive gadgets, and priceless heirlooms. Yet, as Ava peered at her own reflection in the antique mirror, she felt like an imposter, a stranger trapped in a life she no longer recognized. Laura Stanton, a self-made woman of substance, had spent her early years struggling, sacrificing, and relentlessly pursuing her goals. From a small-town girl to a renowned physician, Laura had seen it all: the lows, the highs, and the grueling journey in between. Now, she was determined to instill the same values in Ava, her only child. The idea was simple yet daunting. Ava would work as a packer at the local supermarket, the very job she had belittled just days ago. To Ava, the suggestion was absurd, bordering on punitive. After all, she was a Stanton, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and prestige. But as days turned into nights and protests fell on deaf ears, Ava was left with a sinking feeling there was no escaping her mother's resolution. The change in Laura was stark, almost unnerving. The soft-spoken, gentle woman had transformed into an unyielding pillar of determination, her resolve echoing the relentless fighter she once was. Ava knew that look. It was the one Laura wore when she narrated her stories of struggle and survival. And now, Ava was a reluctant character in her mother's latest tale. For the first time in her life, Ava found herself at the crossroads of acceptance and rebellion. Her pride screamed at her to reject the proposition, to hold on to her privileged life. But a quieter, more reasonable voice urged her to consider her mother's perspective, to try and understand the world outside her cocoon of luxury. One morning, after a sleepless night of wrestling with her thoughts, Ava found herself standing at the precipice of change. Laura, waiting in the living room with a hopeful gleam in her eyes, watched as Ava crossed the room to stand before her. In that moment, Ava felt a strange sensation. It was as if she was standing at the edge of her mother's world, ready to dive into the unknown. "All right, Mom," Ava started, her voice barely audible. "I'll do it." The surprise, followed by a wave of relief and pride that washed over Laura's face, would forever be etched in Ava's memory. Seeing the satisfaction in her mother's eyes sparked an unfamiliar emotion in her heart: empathy. In that moment, Ava realized that her journey of transformation had already begun. And so, Ava Stanton, the heiress to the Stanton fortune, prepared to cross the threshold into a world that was a stark contrast to her own. The path ahead was daunting, filled with challenges she had never faced before. But she was ready to understand, ready to grow, ready to evolve. Ava Stanton's world shifted into a reality beyond her comfort zone, as she walked through the entrance of the local supermarket. There was a strange sense of dread mixed with anticipation that filled her veins, as she caught her first glimpse of her new place of employment. She had visited this place countless times, always as a patron aimlessly roaming the aisles, picking out gourmet snacks and imported chocolates without a second thought. But today, she would be seeing it from the other side, her hands packing the very groceries she used to pick so casually. Waiting to greet her was Mary Ann, the cashier Ava had so mercilessly insulted. Her hardened gaze softened as she observed Ava. She noted the visible discomfort of the once haughty girl and couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. She knew, from years of experience, that the road ahead was a tough one. "All right, Ava," Mary Ann began, her tone professional yet supportive. "I'll show you the ropes. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it." As Ava began her day, she soon found herself grappling with a host of challenges. She struggled with the weight of heavy items, stumbled over product codes, and became flustered as the lines at her counter began to lengthen. The reality of manual labor, so distant from her bubble of comfort, slowly began to set in. But perhaps the hardest part of her day were the interactions, or lack thereof, with the patrons. They barely acknowledged her, absorbed in their own worlds, hardly sparing a glance at the girl who packed their groceries. To them, she was just another faceless employee, a stark contrast to the respect and attention Ava was accustomed to receiving. The day dragged on, with Ava making one mistake after another. Yet, despite the growing physical exhaustion and emotional turmoil, she persisted. With each stumble, Ava picked herself back up. She was, after all, a Stanton. And Stantons did not admit defeat so easily. Her eyes met Laura's, watching from a distance, a mixture of concern and pride in her gaze. Ava straightened her back, her gaze defiant. She was determined to see this through, to prove that she was more than just a spoilt heiress. As the sun began to set and her shift finally came to an end, Ava was left standing amidst the mess of her first day. Her feet were sore, her back ached, and her ego was bruised. But there was a new light in her eyes, a spark that had been absent before. Ava had crossed the line into an unfamiliar world, and she had survived. Ava Stanton woke up the next day with sore muscles and a heavy heart. She stared at her reflection, the traces of yesterday's manual labor evident in the shadows under her eyes. There was something different in her gaze, a newfound humility replacing the once haughty sparkle. Her life had taken an unexpected turn, and she was grappling with this new reality. But there was no time to wallow in self-pity. With a sigh, Ava geared herself for another day at the supermarket. The feeling of trepidation had lessened somewhat, replaced by a certain determination. If yesterday was any indicator, this was not going to be easy, but she was resolute to learn from her mistakes. The supermarket was bustling as usual when she arrived. Marianne, seeing her come in, gave a small nod. Despite their rocky start, a mutual respect had started developing between them. Ava was the girl who had belittled Marianne, yes, but she was also the girl who was now willingly living Marianne's truth. It was a hard pill to swallow, but swallow it she must. The day progressed much like the one before, with Ava packing groceries for the supermarket's patrons. Yet, this time, she took it as an opportunity to observe the individuals she had earlier ignored. She started noticing their stories: the tired mother with 3 children, the elderly man counting his coins, the young student juggling jobs. One interaction stood out: an encounter with an old woman, Mrs. Rosenberg. Known by the staff as a lonely widow who took solace in her weekly grocery shopping, Mrs. Rosenberg always had a kind word for everyone. Watching Ava fumble, she gave her a soft smile. "We all have to start somewhere, dear. You're doing just fine." For Ava, it was a revelation. She began seeing the humanity behind each individual. These were not just people buying groceries, they had stories, hardships, dreams, a realization that humbled Ava further. Laura, too, was observing this change. Seeing Ava engage with people with genuine interest and empathy filled her with hope. Maybe her daughter was learning after all. Despite her exhaustion, Ava found herself feeling oddly satisfied at the end of the day. The job was challenging, yes, but it was also revealing. For the first time, Ava felt like she was a part of something real, something bigger than herself. A week had passed since Ava had stepped into Marianne's shoes, and the initial shock had started to wear off. She had discovered a sense of solidarity and empathy with her colleagues. Her days were long, her body ached, and yet, Ava found herself looking forward to the routine. The morning chaos, the heartfelt conversations, even the end-of-day cleanup, it all seemed fulfilling in a way her previous life never did. One day, a rather busy Tuesday, Ava was managing the checkout when she recognized a familiar face approaching her aisle. It was Gabrielle, one of her closest friends. Gabrielle lived a life very similar to the one Ava used to, a life of extravagance, fueled by the convenience of wealth. She was unaccustomed to seeing Ava in such a role and was taken aback. "Darling, why are you here, looking like this?" she inquired, the distaste evident in her tone. Ava paused for a moment, taking in the disdainful look. Her pride flared up, but then she remembered her mission. "I am learning, Gabby," Ava replied with newfound strength. "I am learning about real work, about real people, about what life really is." Gabrielle's laugh echoed around the shop. "You always were a drama queen, Ava. But this is a bit too much." Ignoring Ava's attempt to explain, Gabrielle strutted off, leaving Ava feeling an odd mix of embarrassment and pride. That night, Ava had a long conversation with Laura. They talked about Gabrielle, about the reactions of other people they knew, about how Ava's new life was affecting their social standing. Laura's wisdom shone through as she explained, "Ava, true friends will understand and support you. Those who don't, well, they don't deserve your concern." The words rang in Ava's ears as she lay in her bed that night, looking at the ceiling. For the first time, she thought about the difference between the life she was born into and the one she was now living. She realized that, in her old life, she had been surrounded by people but had felt alone. In her new life, she was among strangers but felt connected. It was a stark realization, one that hit her hard. The following days saw Ava growing closer to her colleagues. Their shared experiences forged a bond stronger than any she had known. Every gesture of kindness, every shared laugh added a new dimension to her life. As Ava's perspective changed, so did she. She was no longer just the pampered heiress learning her lesson. She was a team member, a friend, a human navigating her way through the ups and downs of life, just like everyone else. A month had gone by since Ava had first stepped into the supermarket as an employee. She was no longer the same person she used to be. Her perception of life and people had radically changed, and this transformation had also changed the dynamics at her home. Laura was beginning to see a different side of her daughter, one she had long hoped to see. Ava was more considerate now, more understanding, and her tantrums were becoming less frequent. Laura was grateful for this change, but she was also concerned about how permanent this transformation was. One day, Ava came back home, tired after a long day at work. Laura was waiting for her in the living room, her expression serious. "Ava, we need to talk," she began, her voice filled with a mix of relief and worry. "You've been working at the supermarket for a month now. I see how this job has changed you for the better, and I'm proud of you. But you can't just keep avoiding your past life. You will have to face it sooner or later." Ava nodded silently, a somber expression on her face. She had been thinking about this too. Her old life felt like a distant dream now, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. "Yes, Mother. I have been thinking about this. I think it's time for me to face my past." In the days that followed, Ava slowly began reconnecting with her old life. She started by meeting her friends and explaining the reasons for her sudden disappearance. Some were understanding, others were judgmental. However, Ava took it all in her stride. One day, while having a conversation with an old friend, Ava had an idea. An idea to bridge the gap between her old life and her new life. She wanted to use her position and influence to make a difference. "I have an idea, Mother," Ava said one evening, her eyes shining with determination. "I want to start a foundation. A foundation that helps people like Marianne, people who work hard but are still struggling. I want to use my privilege for the betterment of others." Laura looked at her daughter, surprised yet proud. "That's a wonderful idea, Ava. It's ambitious, but I believe in you. Let's do it." In the subsequent days, Ava, with the help of Laura, started working on her foundation. The path was challenging, filled with hurdles. However, the determination to make a difference kept Ava going. Another month had passed since Ava announced her plans for the foundation. She'd faced hurdles, sure, but the venture was beginning to take shape. Her idea, initially a vague concept, had been transformed into concrete plans under Laura's expert guidance. They'd even named it the Empathy Foundation. But this journey wasn't a cakewalk. Ava was working on multiple fronts, managing the supermarket job, running the foundation, and juggling her personal life. Yet, she was not daunted. Her resolve was firm. One day, Ava was on her lunch break at the supermarket, enjoying her solitude when she heard a voice. "Excuse me, are you Ava?" Ava looked up to find a young woman standing in front of her. She recognized her as one of the supermarket customers. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" Ava replied, her curiosity piqued. The woman had a humble smile on her face as she said, "I heard about the Empathy Foundation. My name is Sophia. I am a single mother, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I believe your foundation could help people like me." Ava was taken aback. She hadn't expected her foundation's reach to have grown this much already. She gave Sophia a warm smile. "Yes, Sophia, the foundation was created precisely for that. Why don't you come by our office sometime this week, and we can discuss how we can assist you?" Sophia left with a look of hope in her eyes that moved Ava profoundly. This encounter made her realize that her work was beginning to make an impact. This was the change she had dreamed of. In the following weeks, Ava's life took on a new rhythm. The Empathy Foundation started making a real difference in the community. It provided financial aid, job training, and counseling to those in need. Ava's supermarket job, too, wasn't the same anymore. She wasn't just an employee there, she was a friend, a mentor, a confidant to many. Towards the end of another long day, Laura sat Ava down. "Do you remember the day at the supermarket when you first met Marianne?" "Yes, Mother." "It's hard to forget," Ava replied, a hint of remorse in her voice. "Do you see the transformation in your life, Ava? It wasn't just about teaching you humility or empathy. It was about helping you find your purpose in life. You were meant for so much more, and I'm glad you found your path," Laura said, her eyes welling up. Ava, teary-eyed, hugged her mother. This journey had been life-altering, teaching her the value of humility, hard work, empathy, and most importantly, purpose. She found her purpose not in the luxuries she was born into, but in the service of others. And she had her mother and an unforgettable day at the supermarket to thank for it. Finally, Ava said, "Thank you, Mom, for showing me this path. And thank you, Marianne, for teaching me life's most crucial lesson." With newfound resolve, Ava knew her journey had only just begun, and she was ready to face whatever came her way. After all, she had found her purpose, her real wealth. Did you like this story? Comment below what you think and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.